Okay, so let's say you've gotten with your coach and you've decided to come up with a plan to change maybe a technical aspect of your swing, something that you're doing with the club. So that would be called training to learn. That's what we like to call it. So there's a couple different things we want to talk about in training to learn, and I'm going to let Rob kind of explain some of those.
Absolutely. So the first and most important thing to put in your environment, your training to learn environment, is feedback. Do you and your coach agree on a successful attempt, a successful process,
Sure.
or an unsuccessful process? Once you have that idea, it could be anything, as long as it's objective, as long as it's not something that you can kind of guess at,
Sure.
all right, then you need to start to measure that success rate. So the research shows, I'm going to throw a lot of research at you here in this, but the research shows that the brain retains engagement between 30 and 70% success rate, which means that, let's say we did a 5-ball set, which we really enjoy 5-ball sets. If you were only doing 0 or 1 rep out of 5 correct, that'd be under the 30. You need to make this task easier. If you're getting 4 or 5 out of that task correct, then your brain's going to disengage because it's too easy, and you need to do something to make it harder. So it's so tempting to stay in that 4 and 5 zone because it feels good. It makes you feel like you're progressing. But like we talked before, the performance right here is not an indication of learning. You have to do something to kind of push yourself to the brink of your current ability.
So it's that idea of we hear perfect practice makes perfect. That's not really the case. What we're trying to actually instill on you here is that we're trying to push you to that edge where you're going to fail. Right on that line, that's where the learning happens, right? And something that Robbie said is feedback. Feedback's super important. What do we mean by feedback? Well, you got to work with your coach a little bit specifically to what you're trying to do, but that could be, hey, let's video ourselves and see if we're accomplishing something we're trying to do with the club. It's a great way to feedback. Another thing could be an external cue. What I mean by that is something that's in your way or that you're having to swing around, for example. Things like that. Feedback, super, super important when you're practicing because you don't know if you're being successful or not. You don't always have a coach behind you telling you, yes, no, we're doing this correctly or not. So we need to create some sort of environment, learning environment, where you get that feedback to enhance that performance.
Absolutely. So you're probably wondering, how do I change the challenge point? Well, let's say that you've done your 5-ball set and you can't quite do it right. You're at 0 or 1 out of 5. Well, take whatever time is in between reps and see if you can reduce it a little bit. Take whatever variability there is in your environment and see if you can reduce that. Try to do things to make it a little bit more controlled. The last thing I see a lot is doing it too fast. I think if you can slow it down a little bit, I think that is another way to kind of reduce that challenge point, to make it look and feel a little less like an actual golf shot that you're hitting.
Exactly, and to that point, I think that's super important. It's something I've learned recently that has helped me a ton in my coaching, is making you actually take time in between shots, because when we're on the golf course, like we talked about earlier, there may be 3, 4, sometimes even 10 minutes between full swing shots. So if you're not making your practice more like your play, then you're probably not going to learn to transfer that skill over to the golf course. So if you can, take some time in between shots. Take 30, 40, 50 seconds, whatever it is, until you get to that point where you're no longer successful, and then, like Rob's saying, make that time shorter. And then slowly over time, hopefully you'll be able to get better at that skill and doing it in a greater amount of time.
That's right. The thing you need to remember is that your brain has to forget what it did in order to remember. So it's that remembering that actually encodes the pattern and allows you to retrieve that pattern more readily on the golf course. If you imagine taking like a math test where it was like 5 plus 5, and then the next question was 5 plus 5 again, and there are 10 problems all 5 plus 5. Well, you only actually solve the problem once. You just spit out the answer a bunch of times in a row. So every time you take time in between, every time you add some sort of variability in what you're doing or do something different, now it's like having a whole new problem again for your brain to have to solve. And it's that solving the problem that actually lets that get myelinated and encoded in your brain.
I love that. Like, when you learn, the best way to learn is to forget something, because then you have to remember it. And I think that's fantastic. So if you can apply that to your practice more, that learning process, then hopefully it can help you transfer that skill more to the golf.